السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. كيف حالكم؟ بارك الله فيكم. For this week's Sorf, inshallah, we are going to look into one of the mushtaqats that is derived now that we started in the last semester, and that is as-sifatul mushabbahatu bismil fa'il. What does this mean? It means the adjective that has a resemblance with active participle. That is adjective resembling the active participle, which is ismul fa'il. So what is the meaning of this as-sifatul mushabbahatu bismil fa'il? هي لفظ مصوغ من مصدر لازم للدلالة على الثبوت. It is a word derived from an intransitive verb, that is fi'lul lazim. So it indicates something that is very important, and that is permanent or established quality. That is, it indicates that this particular thing is permanent with this person or with this thing. That is what a sifatul mushabbaha always indicates. Once sifatul mushabbaha is used, this is what it indicates, that it's permanent or established quality. ويغلب بناؤها من لازم باب فرحة ومن باب شرفة ومن غير الغالب نحو سيد وميت وما أشبه ذلك. This as-sifatul mushabbaha, most of the times, it is commonly formed or shaped or derived from intransitive verbs of fariha. We all know fariha is intransitive verb, lazim, and sometimes from sharufa. Okay, sharufa is also lazim, like the verbs that are related to something like sharufa. وَمِنْ غَيْرِ الْغَالِبِ, and sometimes they are also derived from other things aside from these two verbs. Okay, like Sayyid. Sayyid was derived from Sada, and Mayyit was derived from Mata. Also, Sheikh is derived from Shakha, so they are not from Fariha and Sharufa. So we also have, but most of the times they are derived from Fariha and Sharufa. Just some rare time or rare or uncommon time, so they can also be derived from other verb aside from Fariha and Sharufa. Then let's talk about the common patterns of this Sifatul Mushabbaha. All the patterns of Sifatul Mushabbaha in total, there are 12. So, two of these patterns are specific to Babu Fariha, which are Af'alu and also Fa'alanu. Af'alu is a mudhakkar, while the feminine will be Fa'la'u. So it is called Af'alu Fa'la'u. That is Ahmaru Hamra'u. Aswadu Sawda'u. Abyadu Bayda'u, and so on. We also have Fa'lan. The feminine of Fa'lan is Fa'la, like Jaw'an, Jaw'a, Atushan, Atsha, and so on. Why 4 of these patterns are specific to Babu Sharufa? So these patterns include fa'alun, like hasanun and batalun. We also have fu'ulun, like junubun, but this one is it's rare, qalil. We also have fu'alun, like shuja'un, furatun. We also have fa'alun, no shadda on nine, just fa'alun, like jabanun, hasanun, and so on. So this is where we're going to stop for this week, inshallah. Next week, continue from here. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.